David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Things are truly, genuinely, honestly not going well for Donald Trump's personal attorney, Michael Cohen. You probably remember that the FBI raided his office and his hotel room, and I believe his condo as well, not long ago. And law enforcement collected a ton of documents during that raid a couple of months ago, and the government has turned over nearly 4 million seized documents so far to Michael Cohen's attorneys to figure out, is there privileged information in any of these 3.7 million documents? And some of the documents that the FBI found had been shredded. And the latest news is that the FBI is now piecing together the shredded documents. And of course, they're not doing this by hand. There are now computer programs that can do this. And at this point, it has gotten so insane that Trump's attorneys' attorneys are working around the clock reviewing the 4 million documents that the FBI has given them. And not only are there unshredded documents and shredded documents, which we'll talk about in a second, there are also hard drives and thumb drives and many, many BlackBerry phones. So it's an endless sort of treasure trove of possible evidence of crimes. And originally, Cohen's team was given until June 15th to go over the nearly 4 million documents. His lawyers are understandably saying, we need like way, way, way more time to do this. So I want to focus in for now, since it could be a while until we actually learn more about the contents of these documents, about the meaning of these shredded documents. And I understand, you hear shredded documents and many people think you shred documents to hide stuff. Not necessarily, right? I mean, attorneys do shred documents regularly for non-sketchy reasons. But yeah, if I'm the FBI, I'm looking very, very closely at the documents that Michael Cohen has shredded. And former FBI analyst Asha Rangappa tweeted about this, quote, "I've watched people piece together shredded documents. It's amazing. This is not going to end well for the defense." And former prosecutor Renato Mariotti, also on Twitter, saying federal prosecutors are piecing together papers shredded by Michael Cohen. That is bad news for him. And one of the funniest things about all of this is that most lawyers have moved to what's called cross-cut shredding. Like you might remember sometimes seeing vertical strip shredders, right? This is where you run a page through it and it shreds a document into these strips. Those are easier to reconstruct with the software that now is available. But most lawyers now have moved to cross-cut shredders, which shred in multiple directions. According to Stormy Daniels' attorney, Michael Avenatti, Cohen had the old strip shredders that he was using. A transcript from his interview with CNN has Jake Tapper saying, "Let me ask you a question. Federal prosecutors say they're putting together papers that have been shredded by Michael Cohen. Do you know anything about those papers?" And Michael Avenatti responding yesterday, "From what I've gathered, Michael Cohen was so cheap, he didn't invest in a cross-cut shredder, which would have made it impossible for investigators at Quantico, forensic specialists at Quantico, to refabricate or reconstitute these documents. Evidently, he had a different type of shredder, so they're in the process of going through it, from what I heard in court today." If true, it is truly stupid Watergate. And I don't think I have to remind anybody that if indeed the shredded documents were related to what the FBI is looking into, and the shredding took place after Michael Cohen knew that the FBI was looking into it, that's the possible crime of destruction of evidence. So it is really not looking good for Cohen right now.
Well, I mean, come on. Michael Cohen can't afford a cross-cut shredder. He has 3 clients, right? One is Sean Hannity, who apparently gave him $10 at a party once, and that's it. And the other is Donald Trump, who never pays his legal bills. And remember, Cohen had to pay for the Stormy Daniels hush money, so he can't afford that.
Apparently, we can't expect him to get that fancy shredder. Make MAGA, not Make America Great Again. My attorney's getting arrested, one possibility. Also, Make America Great Again. No, it's Making Attorneys Get Attorneys. I like both of those much better, not good for Michael Cohen. Indictment, when? I think probably pretty soon. Let's talk about Jill Stein. As most of you know, I've been saying that Jill Stein's campaign stunk from the get-go. And every time I say it, people get mad, people cancel memberships, people send me angry messages. But you know that I don't sugarcoat my views on the show. If I'm going to say something that will anger people, I'm okay with that as long as it's what I actually believe. And that has been sort of the guiding principle on the show. The latest with Jill Stein is that there seems to be something really weird going on with those millions of dollars that Jill Stein raised to pay for a recount of the 2016 presidential election in some key swing states. And from the beginning, I was asking, number one, from a legal standpoint, can Jill Stein demand or trigger a recount for elections that she definitely didn't win? In other words, does she have standing to request or demand or force a recount in a state where either Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton won? I don't know what the answer was to that, but it ended up being merely academic because it never moved forward. And from day one, it stung to high heaven that Jill Stein, after appearing at an event in Russia with Michael Flynn and Vladimir Putin, immediately dismissed the possibility that Russia made any attempts to influence the 2016 election, but immediately started raising millions of dollars for these nebulous recounts that it wasn't even clear whether she could get started because of standing issues. But she raised $7 million from people who wanted the recounts in those few states. It has been about a year and a half. The Stein campaign has not filed an FEC report since September of 2017. It's been almost a year. And the campaign said about a month and a half ago that they have only $932,000 in recount funds left. Where did the other $6 million go? How did Jill Stein and her campaign spend $6 million in 16 months? And why did they stop filing reports about that spending? And the Daily Beast reached out to Jill Stein's attorney, Jonathan Abadie, who said, well, the recount effort is continuing. First of all, I want to know what specific, realistic recount efforts are underway. How is the money being spent for furthering those recount efforts? Jill Stein's campaign spokesperson says that there still could be a recount and that the Stein campaign is also bringing another challenge regarding inspecting voting software that was used in some states. I'm having a very hard time believing that any of this stuff is actually going to happen. And bigger picture, we need her campaign held accountable for not reporting their spending, right? The FEC has already warned Jill Stein about this. There has been a half a year of spending unaccounted for that the FEC wrote to her about in May. And then, of course, this goes fundamentally to Jill Stein's honesty or lack thereof. Her campaign made the promise that any leftover money, the roughly 161,000 donors who donated, would get to decide how the money is used. Not only has that not happened, 6/7 of the money is gone. $6 million of the $7 million is gone without a single recount and without actually being accounted for. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I and many others warned people about donating. Kurt Eichenwald warned people about donating. Jill Stein has been refusing to cooperate with the Russia investigation. She has not filed the appropriate reports about the spending. I'm not surprised at all by this.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a little bit hard to believe that they just took the money and ran, though, because this was all done in public, right? They were asking for recount money, out in the public square. So that would be quite brazen to do, don't you think? I mean, it's not like they're doing some underground secretive thing where they're trying to come up with some Ponzi scheme here.
We don't know what they're doing, right? We don't know what they're doing because $6 million has been spent and they haven't filed any spending reports in September. And we don't know what's going on with the recounts, which they simply claim are continuing. It's almost the next election, right? It's almost November of 2018. Now, if you don't like the story, if you don't like me doing this story, don't tell me I'm a Democratic shill, because I'm not. Don't tell me I'm a Russia bot. And I don't mean that's actually, that I should clarify what I mean by that. That has a couple meanings right now. I don't mean that people are accusing me of being a Russian bot. What I mean is a sort of focus only on Russia and believe every single story uncritically about Russia, because I'm not. Tell me specifically what I'm wrong about on the facts regarding what Jill Stein said and what Jill Stein and her campaign have or have not done. And then we can have a conversation about that. But don't just riddle me with ad hominems on social media because you don't like the fact that I'm talking about this. But I do want to hear from you. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Amanda Bien-Amy. Amanda, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. And I also want to thank longtime member David Beversdorf, who's been supporting the David Pakman Show since 2012. Pat was in kindergarten back when David Beversdorf became a David Pakman Show member.
I was just learning to walk. Luckily, I was potty trained by that time, though.
Yes, otherwise it would be a very awkward day for David Beversdorf to be a longtime member of the day. Join Amanda and David at joinpakman.com. 40% off coupon code is available. It's Vote Soon 18. And it's a big, big thing. Membership is a big deal. The world famous bonus show is available to you every day. And you can also get a lot of the same benefits over on Patreon by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. The David Pakman Show subreddit has been titillated and abuzz ever since yesterday's Roseanne Barr incident, where she called me a bully on social media just hours after getting fired by ABC. One of the discussions on the subreddit is exactly that. Roseanne calls David Pakman a bully on Twitter. Roseanne, you have now officially crossed the line. Well, just wait until the next segment where I talk about what Fox News did with regard to my little spat with Roseanne Barr on Twitter. Very exciting stuff.
Yeah, if Roseanne's first comment about Valerie Jarrett didn't get her fired by ABC, this certainly would have.
Yes, calling me a bully on Twitter would have been grounds for Bob Iger immediately firing her. Also on the David Pakman Show subreddit, this is from 2 nights ago, Sean Hannity is losing it tonight. This guy is insane. Talk about a bunch of snowflakes. Yet when I saw this, I actually tuned into Fox News because I was so curious. And this was in the midst of the Roseanne Barr thing, the revelations about the Michael Cohen shredded documents. I mean, just every possible thing going completely wrong. The Trump totally cucked by the North and South Korean leaders. And Hannity was totally losing it. And we know that Hannity and Trump have a special relationship of sorts. And it was not a good day in Hannityville 2 nights ago.
Even crazier that night, you would say? Because Hannity's losing it all the time.
It was particularly unhinged, yeah. I mean, listen, I guess I can't really judge because I'm not normally watching Hannity, but from what I remember, he seemed extra wacky on Tuesday night. Also from the David Pakman Show subreddit, I would like David to get more conservative talk show hosts on the show. He always seems to win the argument and make them look completely stupid. I don't know that that's how it goes. I mean, I do think that a lot of our audience is predisposed to see my side of a lot of issues, but I'm up for, here's the thing about doing the thing where I interview conservative talk show hosts. In general, the audience doesn't, I can't say what the audience does or doesn't like, but the audience doesn't tend to be that interested from a numbers perspective in me interviewing other political commentators, right? The things that seem to do better are interviews with actual newsmakers, primary sources on issues, scientists, professors, experts in fields. When I do the interviews with other pundit types or commentator types, it doesn't usually do that well with some exceptions. So that's why we tend not to book those types of guests, but I'm totally up for having more conservative talk show hosts on if people are interested in that.
Yeah, it's kind of surprising in a way because you'd think that if they have a big audience, their viewers would want to see the exchange too.
If they tell their audience that they're appearing on the show, which
They
not
may not
everybody
want to.
does. They may not be doing that. So anyway, something to think about. I'm sort of open to it. And lastly, from the David Pakman Show subreddit, entitled David tries to shame a busy scientist for not clearing a schedule to talk to David for free so that David can profit. This is a troll on our subreddit. What they're referring to is the other day, Pat sent an email out to Ben Goldacre, who wrote a book named Bad Science, who I'm reading the book and I'd like to interview him. And his publicist wrote back basically saying he's too busy unless we give him money. And we've never paid any guest to be on the show. So I was not pleased with that. So I went on Twitter and I tweeted to him, listen, I'm really disappointed. I'm reading your book. I think it's fantastic. And your publicist says you can only do it if we pay you. And he wrote back, genuinely seeming sort of surprised that his publicist was saying that, but still not agreeing to come on without charging. And the subreddit user is saying, I'm entitled because I expect him to appear for free. It's not that I expect him to appear for free. It's that you don't really pay for interview guests, right? Either you say as a guest, I want to appear because I want to have the conversation or I think that it'll sell books or whatever, or you say you're not going to do it. But I'm really busy unless you pay me thing is not something that's very common from guests. I don't think it's about my entitlement. If anything, it's about the entitlement of that publicist to say, unless you can pay, we're not going to do it. And also I was thinking, what is the amount they would expect, right? We had this conversation off air because if all they want is $100, it's pretty pathetic to even say, I would only do it if you give me $100. If they want $5,000, it's just laughable. Like, how would anyone think that paying Ben Goldacre $5,000 to appear would be worth it for anybody? You know?
I was willing to empty my piggy bank, but you were convincing me that $9.62 wasn't going to cut it. So listen, you changed my mind.
If $9.62 was what it was going to take, then it's pathetic, and that's not really an interview we should be doing anyway. So yeah, I'm really entitled for trying to bring good guests to the audience. What a terrible person I am. Okay, let's settle back down. DavidPakman.com/Reddit is where you can participate in those discussions. Okay, listen, so Fox News has reported on Roseanne Barr's response to me on Twitter yesterday after her firing, but has removed all evidence that she was actually responding to me. To remind you, yesterday when Roseanne said that Ambien may have been responsible, or we can actually go back to the beginning. This all started when Roseanne tweeted Muslim Brotherhood and Planet of the Apes had a baby equals Valerie Jarrett. That got her fired from ABC News. And then she put out there the idea that it was Ambien that was in some way responsible for these tweets. And when she did that, I responded to her and said on Twitter, oh man, this is just the best. Roseanne is now defending her tweets by saying Ambien made her racist. And she responded directly to me saying, no, I didn't. I blamed myself. Stop lying. Yes, I have had odd Ambien experiences on tweeting late at night like many other people do. I blame myself, okay? It's just an explanation, not an excuse. Okay, bully. So Fox News reported on that tweet. They removed the reference to her tweeting to D. Pakman, which is me. And they also removed that last thing where she said, okay, bully, because that would make it sort of obvious that she's responding to someone. And here is how Fox News reported on Roseanne Barr's tweet to me. No evidence that I was involved in this thing whatsoever.
Roseanne then simultaneously thanked her supporters for defending her and then asked them not to stick up for her, quoting, hey, guys, don't defend me. It's sweet of you to try, but losing my show is zero compared to being labeled a racist over one tweet that I regret even more.
Here we go.
And then when she blamed Ambien, man, Twitter took her to task, and Roseanne responded, quoting, no, I didn't. I blamed myself. Stop lying. Yes, I have had odd Ambien experiences on tweeting late at night like many other people do. I blame myself, okay?
And the ellipses there, which was visible to people who were watching, tells the tale of what was removed, which was calling me a bully. I don't really care, but it's yet again, I mean, just a month or so ago when Stephen Colbert picked up on the fact that Melania had liked our tweet or a tweet about our story questioning what's going on with her and Donald Trump's relationship. Stephen Colbert also removing all references to me. And I know it's not all about me, but it's just funny that we keep getting cucked by corporate media.
I think they just don't want to get lost in the details. So it's not a direct insult. It's more of a missed opportunity, I think.
I think it's a missed opportunity is the right way to say it.
I like how your Twitter, though, and your Twitter who took her to task. That's
right.
A good way of
when they referred
it.
to Twitter took her to task and they showed a response, it was a response to me, right? It would have been nice to get a little mention, but that sounded like Trace Gallagher reading those tweets. Not expecting a shout out from Trace Gallagher anytime soon on Fox News. Let's talk about net neutrality. I've been covering not only the federal government effort to restore net neutrality, the Senate vote to do it, which now goes to the House, but also some of the state level efforts that have been going on. And one of those state level efforts is in California, which is a state bigger than many countries when it comes to population and also GDP. The California, or I guess it wouldn't be GDP, it would be state production, state productivity. And the California Senate yesterday voted to approve a bill that would restore the net neutrality provisions that were repealed by the FCC in December. It was approved completely among Senate party lines. 23 Democrats all voted for net neutrality in California. 12 Republicans did not. And now it goes to the state assembly. And I'm hopeful that if the right wants to live by states' rights, they might also die by states' rights. And what I mean by that is the FCC repeals net neutrality federally. 20 attorneys general sue at the state level. Governors look at using executive orders to reinstate elements of net neutrality, and others look at using their state senate and legislatures to maybe put net neutrality back in. And the same could apply in other areas, right? Like gun safety. As long as you don't violate the Second Amendment, states can do more than the federal government is doing on gun safety. Business regulation, minimum wage, basic income tests, whatever else. States can do these things, but of course, only some states can afford to, usually blue states that are better off economically, often subsidizing red states around the country, actually. So back to net neutrality in California, this bill would not only put back in place those original net neutrality rules from 2015 under Barack Obama, it would actually do more. And one of the things that the California bill would do is block what are called zero rating programs. And what zero rating programs are when ISPs say certain content could be content they get money from, could be content they maybe even own. Watching certain content doesn't count towards your monthly data cap, and that is yet another way that an ISP can favor some content over other content. And if the bill ultimately passes, internet service providers will not be able to get government contracts in California without sticking to the rules that are passed. And this is a really important thing to understand. States can't enforce net neutrality directly, as of right now, relates to commerce law. There is a lawsuit over that. But as of right now, states can't just generally enforce net neutrality law. What states can do is to set rules for what ISPs that they work with have to do. And this relates to something called the market participant doctrine. We don't have to get into the details of that. But the way that states can sort of effectively enforce net neutrality is by setting requirements that ISPs have to meet in order to get contracts with the state. What this sort of means de facto is that since an ISP is not going to have one set of rules for their state customers and another set of rules for all other customers in the state and individual consumers basically just become consumers, and you've got the same rules for everybody. But what does it possibly mean if the state laws start being adopted in multiple states? Well, that's the idea, right? If you see multiple states adopt laws that require some version of net neutrality in order to get state contracts, you might see ISPs just say, you know what, let's just make this policy federally. It is an uphill battle. It's a major one, but it's one that I think is worth fighting because how important this issue is, right? I've talked to you about the meta issue of net neutrality, and I'm going to keep you posted about other states that are working on similar bills. Right now, legislators in 29 states have introduced more than 58 bills dealing with net neutrality in some way, shape, or form. This is a good thing. This is a meta issue, and it's an issue that whatever activism you want to be doing, whether it's on LGBT rights or education or whatever else, your ability to be effective in that activism will be impacted by net neutrality, and that is why I'm going to continue talking about it. Discuss this with us on our subreddit, davidpakman.com/REDDIT. Quick break, back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
I'm joined today by Ryan Cooper, who's a national correspondent at The Week, has a very interesting piece out about the Roseanne Barr fiasco, which we've sort of been pulled into a little bit. She very, very angrily called me a bully on Twitter, Ryan, just to give you a little bit of context, after I sort of jokingly poked fun at the idea that Ambien might have made her racist, or at least disinhibited her enough that she would be willing to tweet racist things. But in your piece, you talk about Roseanne in a sense as a sort of martyr of a sort, making herself a martyr, and some followers of hers doing the same thing. Can you talk about that a little bit? What did you mean by that?
Well, I mean, basically, the first thing to remember about Roseanne is that she literally has like a severe mental illness, apparently multiple personality disorder, and has a sort of characteristic a lot of paranoid political views that tend to swing back and forth very quickly from one extreme to the other. In 2012, she was she was trying to get the Green Party nomination for president.
Right.
In 2009, she was calling Israel a Nazi state. And now she's a fanatical Zionist and a fanatical Trump supporter. And one of the characteristics of the just normal Trump supporters is just a kind of a more moderate version of what Roseanne's apparent inability to stop posting classic Trumpy stuff, which is racism against immigrants, against Muslims and Arabs and black people as well. So, this is just like, what ABC wanted was to sort of cash in on some Trump political stuff, to just say, like, we're going to have a Trumpy show by a Trump supporter where the character is also a Trump supporter. And they got what they were asking for, and the show got great ratings, at least at first. But then, it turns out that that comes with the actual Trump beliefs, one of which is bias racism, and anybody having to do with the Obama administration especially. And so, calling Valerie Jarrett a ape is just what you're going to get with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that anybody who was sort of like surprised by the comment was just not paying attention to Roseanne for the last many, many years. And I want to get back to the mental illness component in a second. To talk about this from ABC's perspective, my analysis from day one was that neither the reboot of the series nor the firing of Roseanne has any connection to any sort of moral or ethical value judgment of the show, nor of anything that Roseanne did. It's been just business decisions all along. The reboot, as you mentioned, was out of this idea that it could be great business to do a show that seems to sort of be sympathetic to the down-home, Trump-supporting, good old whatever of middle America. And the firing also was what they assessed to be the best business decision at the time. But to ascribe any morality to it, I think is wrong, unless you think otherwise.
No, I don't. I mean, certainly you can't perceive any of that. Maybe there was some sort of buried moral trigger in the black hearts of ABC executives that was finally dredged up by this last tweet. But, there was that audio of them, ABC executives, in an advertising meeting. They were joking about how Roseanne's tweets were so incredibly offensive and weird. So yeah, I think it was a purely business decision. It was just a calculation of, ratings versus diluting the brand equity or sparking a potential boycott from liberals. It's like at a certain point you want to cut your losses, but yeah, there was no morality here.
The mental illness thing. I mean, you pointed out some of the ideas that Roseanne has parroted, retweeted over the last many years. It includes, CIA mind control, conspiracy theories, stuff about George Soros involved in almost every area of life that at some point somebody has suggested. And I think that that's something that is either often missed or sort of miscalculated when we think about some of these incidents that happen publicly. I mean, the pattern is this sort of paranoid delusions that seem to have been an underlying theme of a lot of the political conspiracies that she subscribed to. How should we as the public account for the fact that whether it's Roseanne or somebody else, there do sometimes seem to be significant mental illness components to these implosions that take place publicly? I mean, how should the general public account for that in our reaction?
That's a really hard question. It's, I mean, the question of assigning moral, liability to someone who may not be in full possession of, their faculties. I feel like it's kind of a case by case basis, because there are lots and lots of different kinds of mental illness. People are, some of them are mild and don't interfere with people's ability to reason, while others, can be totally debilitating, or people are not even, coherent at all. This seems like kind of somewhere in the middle. It certainly to me seems like there is an kind of an uncomfortable element of exploitation in this, and that Roseanne, she does, by all accounts, have serious mental illness that may not be being treated properly, and that her wild antics get tons of attention. And ABC, clearly knew about that and was capitalizing on it. And, what she may have needed was not this kind of immense level of celebrity and attention, and more like, some therapy and treatment of some sort. But on the other hand, it doesn't. Obviously, I don't know Roseanne personally. I've never met her or anything like that, but she doesn't seem like someone who is completely senseless. She can still speak, and she certainly seems to have, honestly held awful views about, Black people and Arabs and Muslims and George Soros. So I don't know, ultimately, I guess I would come down as somewhere in the middle, thinking that, Roseanne is not without blame, but it's a bit of an exculpatory factor being unwell in that way.
You've, in addition to writing about Roseanne, and we're going to link to your article about that, you've also talked about the intellectual dark web, so-called intellectual dark web a bit, and this sort of free speech warrior movement that is out there. And I think that that's interesting in this story because there is a group of people that like to, or at least first analyze stories through the lens of the so-called battle of ideas, which I have a hard time even saying non-satirically at this point, or through the lens of free speech and censorship. And I found it interesting that some of the individuals who last week applauded the decision of the National Football League to say, you now are not allowed to sit or kneel or not stand basically during the national anthem if you're going to be on the field before a football game, and applauded that decision, are saying that the decision now made by ABC to fire Roseanne is somehow an impingement on her free speech or censorship of comments that she made outside of her employment relationship with ABC or whatever. Fundamentally, aren't these just both cases of private businesses making decisions that they calculate are the right business decisions for them? And that, I guess, let me couch the question this way. Is there any way you can even conceive of in which one might have a different opinion of the NFL decision and the ABC decision? Are there any material differences?
I would say it's very similar in one sense, in that yes, these are private businesses. I think that you could make a tolerable sort of constitutional argument that that the case of the NFL players, they're not saying anything in any sort of explicit way, but just sort of is this like passive demonstration is constitutionally protected speech in a way that just like egregiously offending your bosses is not. But I mean, I think it goes to the heart though of the totally unserious way that this so-called intellectual dark web issue has been treated. You have a bunch of people who, this Jordan Peterson and Dave Rubin and so forth, who are being set up, as these like victims of oppression. But there's no real kind of attempt to articulate the differences, and systematically investigate the issue of suppressed speech, which is absolutely rampant in this country. And usually, the worst cases will usually involve stuff like Palestinian BDS activists and so forth. There are literally lots of attempts to make that kind of speech illegal, and not just like people yell at you on Twitter. But yeah, it certainly, this, I think the Roseanne case was particularly illustrative because this would be a case where you could, by the lights of the kind of intellectual dark web people, they ought to have raised the exact same stink over that as they have over, other instances of people being mean, people losing their jobs. But in this case, the comment was so racist that there was just, it was, indefensible. And I think it goes to the heart of what this Barry Weiss and so forth are actually doing, which is constructing tendentious definitional sort of fortresses around their preferred positions, and not any sort of rigorous defense of free speech as such.
Yeah, it seems that the free speech component is one that is a tool to use when useful given the circumstances, and not actually sort of a true philosophical principle sort of to explore in the depth that it probably should be. Ryan Cooper is a national correspondent at The Week. We are going to link to some of his recent articles. Ryan, great to speak to you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Not too long ago, extreme neoconservative war hawk John Bolton was hired by Donald Trump to be his third national security advisor of an administration that's still not even 18 months old. You'll remember Trump's first national security advisor was Michael Flynn. He's been indicted. Trump's second national security advisor was H.R. McMaster. He was too much of a voice of reason to stay as Donald Trump's national security advisor. So in comes John Bolton, one of the architects of the Iraq War, which Trump supposedly said was the biggest mistake of the Bush administration. But nevertheless, in comes John Bolton as Trump's third national security advisor. And immediately after John Bolton's hiring, the United States is announcing it's pulling out of the Iran deal. North Korea blames Bolton in part for the cancellation of the summit with Trump, which may or may not be back on. I guess we're not really sure at this point. We still have an interview scheduled to take place from the summit, even though we don't know whether the summit is actually going on, but we'll talk about that at another point. And it's very, very clear that Bolton's sort of neoconservative war hawkism is immediately having an impact in the Trump White House. And now the latest is that John Bolton has hired a hate group executive as his chief of staff. Fred Fleitz has been hired to run the staff of the National Security Council. He's been the senior vice president of Frank Gaffney's Center for Security Policy. And Dylan Williams from J Street tweeted about this, saying John Bolton has chosen Fred Fleitz as the new National Security Council chief of staff. Fleitz is senior VP of Frank Gaffney's Center for Security Policy, a Southern Poverty Law Center designated hate group that the Anti-Defamation League condemns as, quote, dedicated to advancement of myriad conspiracy theories and anti-Muslim extremism. This is really, really, really bad. Frank Gaffney is a complete extremist lunatic who has actually had contact with Trump. He's one of these conspiracy theorists. Many of the conspiracy theorists are anti-Muslim. He said, for example, that over the last 20 or so years, his comments have included that Saddam Hussein was involved in the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and the Oklahoma City bombing, that Hillary Clinton's aide, Huma Abedin, is a secret agent of the Muslim Brotherhood, which was actually repeated by people like Michelle Bachmann, who at the time was a congresswoman. He's promoted the idea that President Barack Obama is a secret Muslim, that General David Petraeus, former director of the CIA, submitted to Sharia law, whatever that means, and many other completely outrageous conspiracy theories. And the vice president of that organization is now running the staff of the National Security Council. the National Security Council, responsible for some of the most important decisions our country makes about keeping Americans safe. And I encourage you, go and read about Frank Gaffney, read about the Center for Security Policy, and you're going to start to understand how this administration is the administration of the extremist hate group, right? So the Bush administration, we could say, was an administration subjugated and taken over by neoconservative war hawkism, right? The administration of PNAC, the Project for a New American Century. People like Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz and John Bolton and Bill Kristol. That line of thought, not all of those people literally connected to PNAC, but that line of thought. The Trump administration is the administration of hate groups and ideological extremist conspiracy theorists. The people like Jerome Corsi, who during the Obama administration were saying stuff like Michelle Obama's a man and, I don't know, John Brennan is a secret Muslim or whatever it was that guy was saying. Some of them are now part of the administration. And I guess it's like a case of pick your poison. And we've talked a little bit about how, in a way, Trump surrounding himself with the more buffoonish nuts maybe prevents him from doing as destructive foreign policy as George W. Bush was doing. Although, I don't know. I mean, these people are pretty capable of doing really bad things.
Yeah, I feel like there are two wings of the Trump administration now. One is the crony corrupt wing who are just in it to enrich themselves. Those are the people like Jared Kushner and Steve Mnuchin. And then there's the deplorable wing. Right. And that includes, formerly Steve Bannon, John Bolton, and you can put this guy in as one of the deplorables, I think.
Absolutely disgusting that someone like this would have a position of such consequence in an administration. But alas, this is what we're dealing with right now. And I don't actually have any ideas for how we might combat this other than voting these people out and voting Trump out in 2020. This isn't the most important story by any means, but it's really, really funny. You know how Donald Trump has this history of lying about crowd sizes? The biggest example is the inauguration of his presidency, his inauguration as president, which didn't have big attendance, and Trump claimed it was historic. Then he forced his first press secretary, Sean Spicer, to go out and lie on his first day on the job and say, this was the biggest audience ever, and it was just incredible. Trump has done it again, and he's continued to do these campaign-style rallies. He did one earlier this week in Nashville, Tennessee, and the crowd size that he claimed was bigger than the configured capacity of the arena where they did the rally. The New York Times originally said there were 1,000 people at this rally, and that was wrong. They eventually corrected it, but obviously the New York Times is failing and fake, so Donald Trump tweeted, The failing and corrupt New York Times estimated the crowd last night at 1,000 people, when in fact it was many times that number. And the arena was rockin'. This is the way they demean and disparage. They are very dishonest people who don't get me and never did. Now, it is true that the original New York Times article said 1,000. It was later updated to 5,500. The Trump campaign yesterday said that there were 8,000 people at the rally. Before the rally took place, at another event, Trump said there were 12,000 people already waiting for him at the rally. And eventually, sort of like the final and I guess most formal number claimed by Trump is that there were over 8,000 people by his organization. There were over 8,000 people. The problem with that is that the capacity as laid out for the event on Tuesday, according to Bob Sconey, who runs the auditorium, is that the maximum capacity was 7,500 to 8,000. So whether Trump is claiming that there were over 8,000 people or 12,000 people, it's not possible. And we have a picture, by the way, of the event. It really doesn't look like a huge crowd, tons of empty seats, even just in this particular area of the arena. And as usual, I end up, Pat, with the question of why bother lying about these things? Can Trump not help himself? Does he think nobody's ultimately going to check it out? What is the fixation on such irrelevant things that from day one clearly have fixated this guy? And is it the cult of personality? Is it the delusions of grandeur, the narcissism, the belief that nobody's going to fact check him, or if they do, that he'll just call it fake news, which is what he did when people fact checked Sean Spicer on day one of the administration? I don't really get it.
He's trying to compensate for what he lacks, I think, and what he lacks right now is high approval numbers. They're around 40%. He also talked about the size of his hands yet again in this campaign rally. So I think he's trying to make up for something that he doesn't have. Or, I mean, I'm sure he would say there's no problem there.
Of course, no problem whatsoever.
That's where my mind's going.
You think that these claims are the equivalent of the guy who drives the gigantic monster truck despite having no practical need for it, maybe as compensation for some other physical shortcoming that they may be experiencing.
Yeah, that's Trump in a nutshell, I think.
Yeah, that may be. That actually may be. So once again, lies about crowd size. I mean, why? Just move on. Move on to lies that are more useful to you, right? Because ultimately, who is really impressed by a crowd of over 8,000 or 12,000 versus 5,500? Aren't people paying attention to other things now? Although maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like the committed Trumpist really does care about whether there were 5,500 people or 8,500 people. I don't know. I don't really know too many Trumpists.
He's the president of the United States. You're supposed to be able to get a large crowd to attend your rallies. Wouldn't you think? I mean, 10,000, even drawing those numbers, that should be easy for him.
Didn't 60 million vote for the guy? Like, really, what difference does it make whether 8,500 or 12,000 or 5,000 people went to one particular rally? We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here is a voicemail that is making, I don't know, a point. I don't want to evaluate it until we listen to it, but it is making a point about Roseanne Barr's sort of explanation, not excuse, but explanation for her comments related to the sleep medication Ambien. Let's take a listen to the voicemail.
Now, I'm not defending Roseanne Barr, but there has been some extremely weird things people have done when on Ambien, like murder people, drive a car, have sex in their sleep. I mean, it's certainly possible, but it's still no excuse what she said.
Right. I think that's the point, which is there's no denying that Ambien can cause unusual behavior in people, but it's not going to cause someone who doesn't think racist things to all of a sudden think racist things, right? So if we're going to talk about Ambien as an explanatory factor in what Roseanne did, it would be that it might have disinhibited her in a way that she decided to get on Twitter and tweet the racist things that she already thinks. But the idea, it's the Mel Gibson thing, right? No matter how much I drink, I'm not going to start using the N-word and saying bad things about black people because I don't believe those things. No matter how much Ambien I take, and I guess that's not even the right way to say it because who takes extremely high, you either take Ambien or you don't. It's pretty binary. It's not going to make me all of a sudden believe things that I don't believe. All of those might be disinhibiting substances, but they're not going to make me all of a sudden think that Asians are a major problem in society if it's not something that I already think. And that's, I think, what is being missed here.
And if you know that Ambien lowers your inhibitions and makes you say wacky, crazy things,
move your phone away from the bed.
Exactly. Sign out of your Twitter account before you take it. I mean, there's ways around this.
Nobody's denying Ambien can cause unusual behavior, but the idea that it makes you racist is absolutely pathetic. We've got a great bonus show for you today. We'll talk about the downfall of rising Republican star, Republican Missouri Governor Eric Greitens. We will talk about a woman caught shaving her legs at a public pool in Florida. And we will also talk about Walmart's new initiative for all employees who have been with them 90 days or more, college for $1 a day, as long as it's one of 3 online schools. And we will talk about which schools those are on today's bonus show. Get access to the bonus show. Sign up at joinpakman.com. or by becoming a patron at patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.